Hi, my name is Jessica Pavogel, and I manage the Homeownership Set-Aside Program. Here with me today is Kristen Combs, an HCD Analyst 2. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to view our HSP presentation. During the presentation, we will review the basic round details and key changes, but mainly focus on the most common errors and how to prevent them. For an in-depth overview of HSP, please refer to the HSP User Guide, which can be found on the Resources tab of the HSP Public website. The address for the HSP Public website is listed at the top of this screen. The homepage provides basic round information. Once the round opens, an updated funds remaining balance will be posted on this page. The balance on this page is only updated once a day, typically in the morning. An up-to-date real-time balance is available anytime on your dashboard in HSP Online. From the homepage, you can navigate to any of the 4 navy blue tabs at the top of the page: Registration, Education, Training, and Resources. On the Training tab, you will find copies of all training materials for you to view at your own convenience. The Resources tab is where you will find the forms and documents for HSP. It is a good idea to save this tab as a favorite on your computer, as you will need to visit it often to obtain the income calculation workbook and the real estate retention agreements for each household.
We have made some significant changes to the program. First, cash back up to $250 will be allowed. Second, there will be no minimum contribution from the household required. Third, the maximum grant amount per household has been increased to $7,500. And finally, the member limit has been increased to $37,500 per member per month. As we move along in the presentation, we will discuss each of these in further detail. Many members wonder, what is the source of the HSP grant funds? Federal regulation requires FHL banks to allocate 10% of their net earnings to affordable housing. The greater of 35% or $4.5 million is allocated to HSP. The remainder of the net earnings figure is allocated to AHP.
As you may recall, the first-time homebuyer definition was updated in 2021. All borrowers and owners of the transaction must qualify as a first-time homebuyer per the FHL Bank definition. In addition, a divorced individual who only owned a home with a former spouse no longer qualifies as a first-time homebuyer. The divorced individual would have to wait the 3-year period from the end of the ownership date. Let's test your knowledge on the first-time homebuyer definition. In this scenario, Stacy and Joe are married and want to purchase a home. They currently live in the home that Joe purchased prior to their marriage. Stacy has never purchased a home. Are Stacy and Joe eligible for HSP grant funds? No, they do not meet the definition of first-time homebuyer. Joe owns a home. The updated definition requires all borrowers and owners of the transaction to meet the first-time homebuyer definition. Since Joe has owned a home in the last 3 years, he is not considered a first-time homebuyer. Also, keep in mind, the spirit and intent of HSP is to help households obtain home ownership for the first time. HSP grant funds are not intended to assist with households upgrading to a new home. Let's take a look at another scenario. Ted's divorce was finalized 2 years ago. Ted owned a home with his former spouse, which was sold last year. Is Ted eligible for HSP grant funds? No. Ted has owned a home within the previous 3 years and does not meet the FHL Bank definition of first-time homebuyer. He must wait 3 years from the sale of the marital home to qualify as a first-time homebuyer. If you have any questions about the first-time homebuyer definition or want to run a specific scenario by us, feel free to reach out.
Now, let's discuss household composition. Many times during disbursement review, we discover not all of the household members and their income are disclosed at reservation. FHL Bank's definition of household includes all individuals who currently or will occupy the residence. The household members and their income are required to be disclosed in the income calculation workbook. It is important that the loan application requirements and grant reservation requirements are kept separate. Although you may not have to disclose all household members for the loan application, you do have to disclose all of them for the HSP grant. This includes the disclosure of non-borrowing adults and children. Always ask the home buyer who will be living in the home. The home buyer doesn't know what information you need, so you have to ask. Review income documents carefully. For example, if a pay stub shows the home buyer's tax filing status is married, or if it shows a family health insurance, there is a red flag that there may be additional household members that need to be disclosed. Chris and Courtney are engaged to be married. Chris is purchasing a home. The purchase transaction will close prior to the wedding date. Courtney is not on the home loan. Does Courtney need to be disclosed as a household member? Yes. Courtney intends to occupy the home. Courtney and her income must be disclosed in the ICW. This scenario, the home loan is closing prior to the wedding date. However, regardless, if the home loan is closing prior to the wedding date or after, a fiance intends to live in the home at some point in the near future and should always be disclosed as a household member. Megan is purchasing a home. Her boyfriend and his 3 children will be living in the home. Megan is obtaining the home loan in her name only. In this scenario, who should be disclosed as household members? Megan, her boyfriend, and his 3 children. All 5 individuals intend to occupy the home and must be disclosed as household members in the income calculation workbook. Megan and her boyfriend's income, along with any household members that are age 18 and over that have income, must be disclosed.
Another common error we see is the inclusion of non-occupying co-borrowers and/or non-occupying co-owners. Non-occupying co-borrowers and co-owners are not allowed. For HSP grant qualification, apply FHL Bank's definition of co-borrower and co-owner to the situation. Do not use your institution's definitions to determine HSP grant eligibility. As the definition states on the screen, a co-borrower would be an individual included on the deed, mortgage or deed of trust, and the promissory note. Non-occupying co-borrowers are not allowed. A co-owner is defined as an individual that is listed on the deed and/or the mortgage or deed of trust. Non-occupying co-owners are not allowed. However, non-occupying co-signers are allowed. FHL Bank definition of a co-signer is an individual included on a promissory note, but not included on the deed and/or the mortgage or deed of trust. Again, make sure you are applying FHL Bank's definitions to the transaction to determine eligibility. Let's test your knowledge. Lance and Ashley have filed for divorce. Ashley is going to purchase a home prior to the divorce being finalized. Since they are still married, Lance will have to sign the deed as an owner at the loan closing. Lance will not be living in the home that Ashley is purchasing. Is this scenario eligible for HSP grant funds? No. Lance is considered a non-occupying co-owner, which is not allowed. Ashley will not be eligible for HSP grant funds until the divorce is final. Therefore, the reservation cannot be submitted until the divorce is final. In this scenario, Ben is a recent college graduate. He recently started his new job after graduating college and wants to purchase a home. Ben's debt to income is high due to the large student loan payments, and he hasn't been on his job very long. Because of these factors, his lender will only make the loan with a strong co-borrower. Ben's mom, Jane, agrees to be a co-borrower. Is this scenario eligible for HSP grant funds? No. Jane is a co-borrower and included on the mortgage and/or deed of trust and is not occupying the home. Non-occupying co-borrowers are not allowed. Let's take a look at this last scenario, then we'll move on. Sarah has minimal credit history. Her debt to income is excellent, but her lender needs a strong cosigner. Sarah's grandfather, Henry, agrees to cosign. Henry will not be occupying the home that Sarah purchases. Is this scenario HSP grant fund eligible? Yes. Henry is not occupying the home, but is only signing the note, which makes him a non-occupying cosigner. Non-occupying cosigners are allowed. To summarize, All individuals that are a part of the transaction must occupy the home, and their income must be disclosed. The only exception to this is a non-occupying cosigner, which is allowed. Again, make sure you are using FHL Bank's definitions to determine eligibility for HSP grant funds.
Another common error we see is members allowing home buyers to receive cash back. Cash back exceeding $250 is not allowed under any circumstance. If a home buyer receives cash back in the excess of $250, the member reimbursement will be reduced by the difference between the cash back amount and the $250. In addition, the RERA must be released and a new RERA will have to be executed and recorded for the reduced subsidy reimbursement amount. In the end, allowing cash back in excess of $250 costs your institution money. Correcting the CD and collecting the funds from the home buyer after the loan has closed is not an option. Cash back must be cured prior to the loan closing. As you can see on the slide in section L, it shows highlighted in red the home buyer receiving a $7,500 grant and $500 cash back. This can be cured prior to the loan closing by either reducing the grant amount or applying a principal reduction. The next two slides show how members commonly cure cash back on a CD prior to the loan closing. This is not how your institution has to correct the CD. You should correct it per your institution's policies and procedures. The first option is reducing the grant amount on the CD. In section L, highlighted in green, the HSP grant is reduced from $7,500 to $7,250, resulting in $250 cash back at closing. The second option is applying the extra grant funds to the principal of the loan. In section K, a principal reduction of $250 is applied. In section L, the HSP grant remains at $7,500 and the cash back at closing is now $250. Reducing the grant amount and applying a principal reduction are the most common ways that we see members cure cash back to the home buyer. Other options, such as reducing seller credits, is allowed. It is up to each member to determine the best option for their home buyer's situation. Feel free to reach out to us if you need help curing cash back prior to the loan closing. We are always happy to discuss options with you.
This past HSP realm, members faced a variety of homebuyer education issues that can easily be prevented. The homebuyer education requirement is a reg. We cannot fund a disbursement request unless the homebuyer has completed a homebuyer education course from an approved provider. We will accept a homebuyer education course if the provider is accepted by HUD, Fannie, Freddie, or has adopted the national industry standards for homeownership education and counseling. Links to these websites are available on the Education tab of the HSP public website, as well as in the 2022 HSP User Guide. If the homebuyer takes the course through an online platform such as eHome America, ensure that the provider of the course is approved. eHome America is not the course provider. A couple other tips. If the course is taken online, make sure the homebuyer signs the certificate. Many times, we receive certificates that are not signed, and we have to send the request back for clarification, which delays disbursement approval. While it's not required, we highly recommend that you require the homebuyer to take the course prior to the loan closing. Disbursement requests have to be submitted within 90 days of approval. If the homebuyer has not taken the homebuyer education course, the disbursement request cannot be submitted, and it can sometimes be difficult to get a homebuyer to do something for you once the loan has closed. So best practice would be to require the course completion prior to the loan closing.
Timely submission of disbursement requests is imperative. Once the reservation is approved, you have 90 days to submit the disbursement request. The grant expiration is updated on your dashboard as shown on this slide. In addition, 30 days prior to the grant expiration date, HSP Online sends a reminder email to all contacts associated with the reservation. Do not ignore the email reminders. When the grant expires, the funds reserved for the household are transferred back to the allocation and any member can reserve the funds. Unfortunately, this can and has resulted in members not being reimbursed for their grant funds. An important piece to making sure disbursement requests are submitted prior to grant expiration is knowing what the statuses in HSP Online mean. Statuses can be viewed on the dashboard and on the reservation disbursement home screen. Status descriptions can be found in the HSP user guide. One of the biggest misconceptions is that when the status is pending, that it is submitted. This is not true. If the status has the word pending, it has not been submitted to FHL Bank. Pending means we are waiting on you, the member, to submit the reservation or disbursement to us. Reservation and disbursements will expire in pending status. Make sure you select Submit on the reservation disbursement home screens. Once you have submitted, the status will update from pending to submitted, and all contacts associated with the transaction will receive an email confirming submission. Timing is a big factor that contributes to smooth and successful participation in HSP. Every year, we receive requests to expedite reviews. Reservations and disbursements are reviewed in the order of receipt. We will not honor a request to expedite. Please give us plenty of time to review your submissions. Submit the reservation as part of your loan processing responsibilities. Appraisers and title companies are given time to provide their services. The same timing should be allowed for HSP reservations. We ask that you allow 15 days for us to approve your reservations. Please schedule your loan closings accordingly. However, if we have to ask for additional information, explanations, corrections, etc., the approval may be delayed longer than 15 days. Here are some tips for quick approval. Know the income calculation guidelines. Submitting too much documentation or the wrong documentation will cause a delay. Don't ignore emails from HSP Online. Emails are sent when clarification is requested. Log into HSP Online and determine what is needed to cure the clarification request and submit what is needed quickly. Designate 1 or 2 individuals to manage reservations, disbursements. Our most successful members have 1 or 2 individuals that manage HSP. They are marked as contacts on the additional contact screen in HSP Online and receive all notification emails. They know the grant guidelines and how HSP Online works, including what the statuses in HSP Online mean. Remember, if the status has the word pending, we are waiting on you and cannot review the reservation or disbursement. Ultimately, a quality submission is the only way to guarantee a quick approval.
Successful members also make a habit of visiting the HSP website to obtain forms for each household. They do not save HSP documents on their computer. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, income calculation workbooks and real estate retention agreements should never be saved on your computer to reuse for multiple households. These documents are updated periodically, sometimes in the middle of a round. If an outdated version is used, clarification will be sent to obtain the current version. This has been a common issue for several members the past couple HSP rounds, especially with the real estate retention agreement. When an outdated version is executed and recorded, we have to send a release to you, the member. You are responsible for paying for the release and for the recording of another RERA. If you currently have any HSP forms saved on your computer, delete them. Make the Resources tab a favorite on your computer and visit it each time you need to obtain a document for a household. Now, let's test your knowledge on a couple scenarios. Hank is preparing 2 reservations for 2 different households. Hank obtains an ICW from the HSP website. After completing the income calculation for the first household, Hank uses the same ICW to complete the income calculation for the second household by deleting the first household's information and entering in the second household's information. Did Hank follow the best practices when completing the ICWs? No. Hank should have obtained a new ICW from the HSP website for the second household. Many times, ICWs are submitted with information from multiple households because the preparer failed to delete all the previous household's information. This delays reservation approval. Let's take a look at another scenario. Amanda is preparing a loan closing for a household that is approved for HSP grant funds. Amanda has a RERA saved on her computer from the previous HSP round and uses it to prepare a RERA for the household to sign at the loan closing. Did Amanda follow the best practices when preparing the loan closing documentation? No, Amanda should have visited the HSP website and obtained a new RERA for the loan closing. The RERA should never be saved on your computer to reuse for multiple households. If you are unsure what version of the ICW or RERA you should be using, please contact us for help.
Next up is income. We don't have time today to go over income calculation in depth, but I do want to go over a few items. We only require one pay stub or a VOE, not both. We prefer a pay stub. Make sure the income documentation accurately represents a normal pay period regarding hours worked or paid per pay period. Complete the ICW with the income document that you are providing to us. All information entered in the ICW must be verified with the income document provided. On page 5 of the AHP HSP Income Calculation Guide, you can find our income documentation requirements. We ask that you do not provide documentation in excess of what is needed. For example, we only need a tax return if the home buyer is self-employed, and we only need the tax return for the most recent tax year. Do not provide tax returns or W-2s for a salary or hourly wage earner. Again, we only need one pay stub or a VOE for salary or hourly wage earners, not multiple pay stubs or both a pay stub and a VOE. Make sure to include all income for all household members. Reference pages 3 and 8 of the AHP and HSP Income Calculation Guide for income inclusions and exclusions. If the household member is age 18 and older, but is not an income earner, remember to have them sign an AHP or HSP Zero Income Certification. This document can be found on the Resources tab of the HSP public website. The ICW will populate a red font message if a zero income certification is needed based on the information you enter regarding the household member. In the example on the slide, household member 2 is age 18 or older and has been disclosed as a non-income earner. As you can see at the bottom of section 1, a reminder appeared stating that a zero income certification should be submitted. Upload the signed zero income certification with the other income documentation as one PDF on the household income screen. Many times, income is not calculated correctly, which causes a large discrepancy between the year-to-date earnings calculation and the base wage calculation. Discrepancy of $3,000 or more require an explanation from the employer and/or correction. A red font message will appear under the highest calculated income if there is a large discrepancy. Do not submit the reservation request if a discrepancy exists unless it is accompanied by a reasonable explanation from the employer. Refer to page 6 of the AHP and HSP Income Calculation Guide for assistance with discrepancies. The income calculation slides on the training tab also provide helpful information regarding discrepancies. I highly recommend reviewing the income calculation slides as they provide useful and helpful information that will help you have a better understanding of how to calculate income for HSP.
Many of you viewing this presentation have been participating in HSP for several years and have a good understanding of the process. But for those of you that are new, this slide provides a step-by-step overview of the HSP process, from interviewing the household for HSP grant eligibility to funding of the disbursement request. More detailed step-by-step information about the process can be found in the HSP user guide. This concludes our presentation. I want to thank you for joining Kristen and I. I hope that the information provided contributes to your success while participating in HSP. As always, utilize our guides and forums to learn more about HSP And always feel free to contact us by phone or email if you can't find the answer in one of our guides. We look forward to working with you and wish you much success.